Exactly. Oh, hey everyone, welcome back to our show.
We are already having way too much fun in the studio today to join us.
That's right, so grab a drink, get comfortable, and conversation.
Welcome to the debate. So imagine your smartphone battery turns red. It hits 1%, the screen goes black, and the device shuts down completely. As a user, you know exactly what to do, right?
Yeah, you panic for a second and find a charger.
Exactly. The solution is entirely binary and incredibly simple. You find an outlet, you plug it in, you leave it alone, and you let it passively recharge. The machine does absolutely nothing while the power flows back into it.
Right, and it's a beautifully clean, predictable process. We inherently love things that are visible and easily categorized.
We really do. But when you step into the world of organizational psychology and look at human energy, specifically the crisis of employee burnout in an era of constant digital connectivity, that simple battery metaphor is not just inadequate, it's actually leading managers completely astray.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Because human beings are not lithium-ion batteries. We don't necessarily recharge just by being unplugged and left in a dark room. And that brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are looking at this modern crisis of burnout specifically through the lens of corporate managers who are tasked with improving employee well-being.
And it's a monumental task right now. I mean, the central question we really need to untangle for them is this. To achieve vital psychological detachment and optimal recovery, should managers foster environments that encourage passive relaxation and the strict avoidance of all demands? Or, and this is where it gets interesting, should they foster environments that promote active mastery experiences?
Meaning activities that actually require effort.
Exactly. Activities that require effort but replenish our internal resources through new, engaging challenges.
Right. So we are going to ground this entire discussion in empirical psychological research, looking closely at how humans actually process stress and fatigue. And I'll be taking the stance that passive relaxation and building strict, impermeable boundaries to avoid work demands are the absolute foundational necessities for worker health.
Okay, bold claim.
I back it up, though. I ground this in what psychologists call the effort recovery model, which essentially proves that true recovery only happens when the bodily systems that were taxed by work are allowed to completely power down.
Well, I look at the data and come to a very different conclusion. I'll be arguing that active mastery experiences, so things like, learning a new language, taking up a complex hobby, conquering a physical challenge, are vastly superior for combating burnout. I'm drawing heavily on the conservation of resources theory.
The COR theory.
Yes, core theory, which shows us that just stopping work isn't enough. Employees have to actively gain new internal resources to truly recover.
Okay, let's start by unpacking what recovery actually means in the literature, because it's a term we throw around a lot in corporate wellness seminars. The gold standard metric for employee recovery is psychological detachment.
Which is a great term.
It is.
But I think it's crucial for managers to understand that this does not just mean physical absence from the office. I mean, you can be sitting on a beach in Hawaii, but if you are mentally anticipating tomorrow's supply chain problem or feeling lingering anxiety over an unread Slack message, you are not detached.
Absolutely. Psychological detachment means the mental cord is completely severed for that period of time. Right. And according to the effort recovery model, as well as allostatic load theory, there's a very specific physiological mechanism at play here. When you are working, especially under stress, specific functional systems are taxed. Your sympathetic nervous system is highly activated. Cortisol and adrenaline are just flowing into your bloodstream.
Yeah, the classic fight-or-flight response.
Exactly. For actual recovery to happen, those stress-related physiological reactions must return to their pre-stress baseline. The system literally has to stop firing. Therefore, if a manager wants to facilitate recovery, the absolute priority must be implementing practical methods that facilitate pure relaxation, which, clinically speaking, is a state of low activation. You have to remove the demands completely.
See, I agree entirely with your definition of psychological detachment. We are perfectly aligned there. But the mechanism of how we actually achieve that detached state in the modern world, That is where I think the passive relaxation approach just completely falls apart.
How so? I mean, if the system is overworked, resting the system seems like the only logical remedy.
It seems logical until you look at how the human mind actually operates. The fundamental flaw in relying solely on passive relaxation is that it views the human brain like a void waiting to be emptied. But the mind doesn't just empty itself.
Right. It wanders.
It does. And this is where the conservation of resources theory, or CORE, comes in. CORE posits that stress occurs when individuals are threatened with the loss of their internal resources, things like emotional energy, self-esteem, or a sense of competence.
Okay.
Burnout is the result of persistent, chronic resource depletion. Merely stopping the demands, say sitting on the couch and staring at the television, does not replace the psychological resources that were lost during a brutal workday. To recover, employees must actively gain new resources. They need a surge of self-efficacy, vigor, and positive mood.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm following your logic here. You're saying that to recover from expending too much effort, an employee needs to expend more effort. How does that work in practice?
Through what the research defines as mastery experiences. These are off-the-job activities that provide challenging learning opportunities. Think of taking an immersive cooking class, training for a martial art, or even joining a local theater group.
That sounds exhausting.
Yes, mastery requires self-regulation. It requires effort. It demands energy. But engaging in these challenges gives you a win. It builds competence, and that is the most effective way to combat burnout. If a corporate well-being strategy only offers people a dark room to lie down in, it's failing to rebuild the resources they actually need to face Monday morning.
Look, I hear what you're saying, but let's look at the reality of the modern workplace. The greatest threat to relaxation today is something called workplace telepressure.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. It's this psychological urge to respond immediately to work-related messages, combined with this ambient preoccupation with quick response times. If you're a manager listening right now, think about your team. Even if they are sitting on their couch on a Tuesday night, if they are experiencing telepressure, their functional systems are still firing. They're in a state of hypervigilance.
Sure.
My argument is that a manager's mandate must be the aggressive structural removal of that telepressure to allow passive relaxation to occur. Prescribing mastery feels like, well, ignoring the immediate crisis. Let me give you an analogy.
Go for it.
Let's say I have an employee who is absolutely crushed by their workload. They are deep in exhaustion. Suggesting they take up a demanding hobby feels akin to telling someone who just ran a marathon that the best way to recover is to go hit the gym and do heavy squats. Don't they just need a physiological reset?
Okay, it is a really tempting analogy. But the flaw there is that human cognition doesn't map perfectly to muscle fatigue. Mental energy isn't a single physical muscle that just needs to stop moving. Let's look at what actually prevents that physiological reset you're talking about. Why can't that employee on the couch just relax?
Because of the telepressure.
Partially, but deeply, it's rumination. And specifically, a psychological principle called the Zeigarnik effect. Have you ever tried to just sit back and watch a movie on a Friday night, but your brain keeps looping back to a slide deck you didn't finish?
Oh, all the time. It's incredibly frustrating.
That is the Zeigarnik effect in action. It dictates that unfinished tasks stick in our memory much more persistently than completed ones. In the modern knowledge economy, tasks are rarely finished. There is always another phase, another email, another pivot.
True.
So when an employee goes home and tries to passively relax, the Zeigarnik effect kicks in. Because their mind is unoccupied by a new challenge, it defaults to the unresolved threat, the unfinished work. This leads to affective rumination. They lie awake at night stressing, which spikes their cortisol, impairs their sleep, and completely prevents the physiological recovery you're advocating for.
But my solution to the Zeigarnik effect isn't just telling people to relax harder. My solution is targeted digital disconnection. We can sever the tether. We can use channel segregation, having a completely separate device for work that gets turned off at 5 p.m.
If they actually turn it off.
We can institute regular digital detoxes. Research clearly shows that these practical methods are highly effective, especially for a group that organizational psychologists refer to as segmenters.
Right, people who prefer strict boundaries.
Exactly. These are employees who possess a natural, innate preference for keeping their work and home domains as rigidly separated as possible. For a segmenter, if the smartphone stops buzzing, the Zeigarnik effect is largely silenced. They don't need to go rock climbing to stop thinking about the office. They just need the organizational norm to genuinely support them going offline.
I understand the appeal of that, but I just don't buy that it's a comprehensive solution. Let me tell you why. The data on digital detoxes is actually incredibly mixed. Sometimes taking away the phone actually increases anxiety because the employee is sitting there wondering what fires are burning without them.
That's usually just withdrawal.
Maybe, but more importantly, relying on digital disconnection ignores the complex nature of burnout. Let's bring in the job demands resources model, or the JDR model. This is crucial for managers to understand. The JDR model proves that burnout doesn't just arise from having too many demands. It arises from incessant demands coupled with inadequate resources. Burnout is clinically defined by 3 distinct dimensions: emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and a sense of reduced professional efficacy.
Right, so we have the health impairment process, which is the exhaustion, and the motivational process, which covers the cynicism.
Exactly. Now, passive relaxation and channel segregation might address the exhaustion component. I will happily concede that sitting on a couch without a phone temporarily halts the demands. But sitting on a couch doing a digital detox does absolutely nothing to cure the cynicism or the feelings of inefficacy.
I mean, they aren't actively getting more cynical on the couch.
But they aren't rebuilding either. When an employee feels incompetent or undervalued or just like a cog in a machine at work, the only way to rebuild that shattered self-efficacy is to experience competence somewhere else. They need a challenge they can actually conquer.
Okay, so the mastery piece.
Right. If you are learning to play the piano and you finally master a complex piece, you generate a massive surge of confidence and positive affect. That cognitive absorption hijacks the brain away from rumination, and the win cures the cynicism. If managers only focus on reducing demands, they are literally only treating 1/3 of the burnout syndrome.
That's a fascinating way to frame the JDR model, but I'm still not convinced by the practicality of it. Because you are making a massive assumption about the employee's baseline energy levels.
How so?
Expecting a severely fatigued employee to muster the executive function for a mastery hobby ignores the core reality of the effort recovery model. When job stressors are high, think severe time pressure, ambiguity, involuntary overtime, they create acute fatigue. That fatigue severely depletes an individual's self-regulatory capacity.
It takes willpower, yes.
It takes immense willpower to initiate a challenging off-job activity. If an employee is suffering from chronic exhaustion and high telepressure, a manager's first duty has to be providing absolute downtime, a pure gray mode for their life. Insisting on active recovery when their self-regulatory battery is completely drained can actually backfire. It becomes just another demand, which increases their allostatic load.
It only backfires if the mastery is forced upon them or unsupported by the culture. But we have to look at the alternative. Think about what actually happens when you leave someone in that gray mode you just described.
They rest.
No. Studies on recovery experiences show that low-effort activities often lead to a profound sense of apathy. The conservation of resources theory warns us about something called loss spirals. When people are exhausted, they engage in defensive postures to protect whatever tiny bit of energy they have left. They isolate themselves. They become sedentary. They doom scroll for hours.
Well, doom scrolling isn't relaxation.
But it's what happens in gray mode. This defensive posture prevents them from gaining the resources they desperately need to recover. So they enter a downward spiral. They have no energy, so they do nothing, which gives them no new energy, so they remain exhausted. Mastery is the circuit breaker for that spiral.
But my argument is that the circuit breaker has to be thrown by the manager in the workplace, not put on the shoulders of the exhausted employee in their free time. And this brings us to how corporate managers must actually apply these concepts via policies. Because telepressure is almost always an external function. It's driven by implicit organizational norms. The manager's role is to aggressively build structural barriers to enforce relaxation.
When you say structural barriers, what does that actually look like in practice?
It looks like unambiguous communication that after-hours responses are not just unnecessary, but actively discouraged. It looks like implementing server-level email batching,
So if a manager sends an email at 9 p.m. on a Friday, the server holds it and it literally does not hit the employee's inbox until 8 a.m. on Monday.
Okay, but
Let me finish this point. It's taking the burden of willpower away from the employee. The research on segmentation preference shows that employees are actually quite successful at detaching when the organizational norm undeniably allows for it. Managers must ruthlessly engineer the work environment to eliminate the structural causes of telepressure. That grants the employee the genuine permission and the psychological safety to achieve a state of low physiological activation.
I mean, that's a compelling argument for boundary setting. But have you considered that a purely structural approach like server-level batching treats professional adults a bit like toddlers who need their toys locked away so they'll go to sleep?
Oh, come on, it's about systemic support.
It's rigid. Managers shouldn't just be building walls, they should be building capacity. Instead of rigidly locking down servers, managers should invest in recovery training programs that teach active coping and self-care skills. And even more importantly, they should provide high job control or autonomy.
Job control?
Yes. When employees have high job control, they can proactively adapt their work schedules to pursue mastery experiences outside the office. An employee can decide, I'm going to leave at 3 p.m. on Thursday for my photography class, and I'll catch up on emails on Sunday morning, because they have the autonomy to manage their own outcomes.
I see the appeal of treating everyone like highly autonomous knowledge workers. But the research points out a massive paradox there. If a manager gives high job control, as you suggest, the data actually warns that job control can severely hinder psychological detachment.
How so? Autonomy is universally recognized as a positive resource.
It is, but having the autonomy to choose how and when to work often stimulates continuous background thinking about the job during off hours. If I have total control over my project and I choose to leave at 3 p.m., I might physically be at that photography class, but my brain is still actively mapping out the project timeline because I am the sole owner of it.
Well, that's just poor boundary management.
But the boundary becomes incredibly permeable, and a permeable boundary ruins both passive relaxation and active mastery. You end up not enjoying the photography class and not resting either. Paradoxically, the absolute freedom you're advocating for can become a psychological prison where the employee never truly detaches.
It only becomes a prison if the individual lacks the internal resources and the training to manage that autonomy. Yes, job control introduces complexity. We don't punch a clock at 5 p.m. anymore. But it also enables individuals to take an active, empowered approach toward their environment, which research shows spills over beautifully into their personal lives.
If they can handle it.
Right, and people with high job control are significantly more likely to pursue learning activities outside of work. They don't just endure their jobs and collapse on the weekends, they navigate their lives. By teaching active recovery strategies, how to seek out mastery, how to engage in mindful self-care, managers equip employees to handle the complexities of modern, flexible work. A rigid server-level block on emails might work perfectly for an assembly line mindset, but I'd argue it is deeply maladaptive for the modern creative or knowledge worker who thrives on autonomy and active engagement.
Okay, so we are looking at two fundamentally different managerial philosophies here. Let me summarize where my perspective lands based on the empirical evidence we've discussed. Employee well-being at its absolute core must be rooted in the effort recovery model. The human physiological system, our sympathetic nervous system, our stress hormones, cannot endure constant activation without breaking down. Corporate managers must recognize that the modern digital landscape creates an invisible chronic stressor in the form of telepressure. Therefore, the most effective evidence-based intervention a manager can make is to ruthlessly eliminate that telepressure and enforce rigid structural boundaries. By doing things like email batching and normalizing true disconnection, we allow for passive relaxation. This lowers the allostatic load and lets the employee's physiological and psychological systems return to a healthy, sustainable baseline.
And my summary is that while returning to a physiological baseline is a necessary first step, it is wildly insufficient for long-term health, happiness, and performance. True recovery requires the conservation of resources. Simply avoiding work does not cure the cynicism or the loss of professional efficacy that characterizes deep, systemic burnout.
The motivational piece.
Exactly. Managers must move beyond just giving people a passive time off and instead foster cultures where employees have the energy, the autonomy, and the organizational encouragement to pursue active mastery. Conquering new challenges outside of work, whether it's learning a language or scaling a climbing wall, is what rebuilds an employee's self-efficacy and vigor. That is how you create a genuinely resilient workforce capable of handling modern demands without spiraling into apathy.
Common ground today is on the definition and importance of psychological detachment. We both agree it is absolutely vital to preventing burnout. An employee must be able to mentally leave the workplace behind. And I think we also agree that the modern smartphone, with its constant pings and notifications, is undoubtedly the greatest enemy of that detachment.
We are certainly aligned there. The smartphone creates a ubiquitous, dangerous tether to the office. But we remain in very thoughtful disagreement over the ultimate remedy to that tether. You see the remedy in deep rest, digital detoxes, and structural disconnection from leadership. Whereas I see the ultimate remedy in conquering new challenges, active engagement, and building individual capacity.
Indeed, and for the listeners, particularly those of you in management positions or HR, this really highlights how complex the interplay is between an employee's personal segmentation preferences, the unique demands of their specific job, and their chosen recovery strategies. There is immense value here for managers willing to look beyond simplistic, one-size-fits-all wellness programs. Giving everyone a meditation app subscription isn't going to fix a systemic burnout issue.
Definitely not.
The source material we've based this debate on today offers even more nuanced organizational strategies for those looking to delve deeper into these models.
It certainly does. Human psychology is deeply nuanced, and our approaches to managing human energy in the workplace must be equally sophisticated. We can't rely on simplistic solutions for complex human systems.
So, we return to the thought we started with. If human energy were as simple as a lithium-ion battery, a manager's job would just be finding the nearest outlet, plugging the team in, and flipping the switch to off. But as we've explored today, figuring out whether a severely burnt-out employee needs to power down completely in a dark room or find a brand new, challenging circuit to light up, well, navigating that nuance is the real challenge of modern leadership.